The stellar dawn drifted through the void like a silent cathedral, its silver hall catching the cold light of distant stars. Inside, the hum of engines and the soft rhythm of air recyclers filled the corridors, a steady reminder of life clinging to the edge of nothingness. For most of the crew, this was a grand adventure charting unknown systems, sampling alien worlds, but for Jake Murphy, it felt like exile. He stood barely 5'6", the lone human among giants. The Corfac warriors towered over him, their scaled hides gleaming like forged metal, eyes bright yellow and sharp with predatory awareness. Even the scientists from other species loomed above him with their elongated limbs and wide, alien frames. Jake always felt like a misplaced piece in some grand puzzle, fragile in a ship built for titans. His world had shrunk to the small, sterile lab tucked away in the stellar dawn's lower decks. Here, surrounded by samples sealed in glass and the glow of data screens, Jake could pretend he belonged. He adjusted the microscope, focusing on the specimen before him, a plant they'd brought back from Kepler 442b. Its petals shimmered blue, pulsing faintly as if breathing. Bioluminescent, beautiful, and possibly dangerous. Jake's mind whirred with questions. How did it produce light? What was its chemical makeup? Could it be medicinal or deadly? The door slid open behind him with a hiss, and Jake stiffened even before the voice came. "Well, look what crawls out of its hole," rumbled Grunon. His voice was deep, edged with amusement that always carried a hint of cruelty. Jake didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew that tone, knew the rhythm of heavy steps that followed. A shadow stretched across the workstation, massive and oppressive. "Answer me, Softskin," Grunon said. The name dripped like venom. Behind him, laughter. Rolled a chorus from the other Corfac warriors, clustered in the doorway. They were all young, restless, addicted to dominance displays, like predators circling easy prey. Jake kept his eyes on the microscope. "I'm working," he said quietly, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. "Captain wants a full report on the samples." "Samples," Grunon repeated, mimicking Jake's voice in a nasal, mocking tone. "So important. The mighty human studies flowers, while real warriors hunt death on alien worlds." Laughter shook the walls. Someone added, "Careful, Cargo. Don't strain yourself lifting that leaf." Jake swallowed hard, focusing on his breathing, his notes. Ignore them. Just ignore them. But the words cut deep, sharper, because they weren't entirely wrong. He couldn't fight like them, couldn't even breathe on half the worlds. They strode across bare-skinned and fearless. The laughter faltered when another figure filled the doorway, a presence so immense it stilled the air. Vexer, the oldest of the Corfac warriors, scarred from centuries of battle, each mark a story no one dared question. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His golden eyes swept the room, slow and heavy like a blade dragged across stone, and the younger warriors shifted uneasily. They stopped laughing, but their smirks lingered as they drifted away, leaving only the echo of their mockery. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced toward Vexer. The giant still stood there, silent, watching him with that same unreadable stare. For a heartbeat, Jake wondered if the old warrior saw him as pathetic too, or something else entirely. Then Vexer turned and was gone, his footsteps fading into the ship's endless hum. Jake tried to shake off the tension, returning to the microscope. But as the plant's glowing filaments sharpened into view, his pulse quickened for a different reason. Chemical traces lit up on the scanner complex, aggressive compounds unlike anything in the database. His breath caught. This wasn't just bioluminescent beauty. This was a weapon nature had honed to perfection. He ran a quick test, hands trembling. As results flashed across the screen, neurotoxic. A fragment the size of a fingernail could paralyze. A single petal could kill. Jake froze, the weight of realization crashing over him like cold water. The warriors had left the lab carrying samples. He'd seen them earlier, clutching the plants like trophies, laughing about tasting real food. He stared at the deadly bloom glowing softly under the glass, a silent predator masquerading as a flower. And then a chill worse than the void slid down his spine. They'd already taken it to the mess hall. Jake shoved his chair back so hard it slammed into the wall. His breath came quick and shallow as the implications hit him like a blow. Grunon and the others were going to eat the flowers. Right now. Laughing, boasting, daring each other. All while holding poison that could stop their massive hearts in minutes. He grabbed his data slate, yanking the cord free, and bolted for the door. The sterile corridors of the stellar dawn stretched ahead, wide enough for creatures twice his size. His boots pounded against the floor, echoing in the hollow. Silence between deck plates. Every second that passed felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. Think Jake? Antidote? Counteragent? He had nothing prepared. Why would he? No one on this ship believed plants could be dangerous. To the Corfac, toxins were a joke, a test of dominance. They didn't respect caution. They respected scars. Jake rounded a corner, heart thudding against his ribs, and nearly collided with a floating service drone. He swore, sidestepped, kept running. The mess hall was 2 levels up and 3 corridors over. He didn't even notice the stares from passing crew as he sprinted past a blur of pale skin and panic in a sea of giants. He burst through the mess hall doors just as laughter erupted from a long table near the center. 4 Corfac warriors sat there, the table groaning under the weight of raw cuts of meat, thick-skinned fruits, and bright green kelp from the last planetfall. And in the middle of it, like a crown jewel, lay a heap of shimmering blue flowers. Their petals glowed, faintly under the hall's dim lights, pulsing like they had a heartbeat. Stop! Jake's voice cracked the air as he stumbled toward them, chest heaving. His cry drew heads, confused looks, and then smirks. Grunon grinned, teeth sharp and glistening, one huge clawed hand already lifting a flower toward his mouth. Look, Soskin finally joins us. You want a real meal? Something better than your paste tubes? Don't eat that, Jake said, forcing strength into his voice. I'm serious. That plant, it's poisonous. One bite could kill you. The table erupted in laughter. One of the younger warriors slapped the surface so hard the plates jumped. Kill us? These jaws crush bone. Our stomachs melt steel. What's a little flower, human? Jake stepped closer, putting himself in Grunon's shadow. His voice dropped, urgent now. This isn't a joke. The toxin attacks the nervous system. You'll seize up in minutes. Your lungs will shut down. Grunon bent low, so close Jake could see his reflection in the warrior's molten yellow eyes. You sound afraid, he growled. Afraid will show how weak you really are. That's why you warn us, yes? Because deep down, you hate that we can eat what you can't. That's not true, Jake shot back. His voice shook, but the words rang clear. I don't care about pride. I care about life. Yours. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Grunon's face. Hesitation, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The smirk returned, wider, crueler. He lifted the flower high, petals trembling in the draft from the vents. Then watch, little Soskin, he said softly, almost tenderly, before baring his fangs. No, Grunon. Bit down. The petals crunched like brittle glass between his teeth. Blue sap gleamed on his jaws as he chewed slowly, savoring every motion like a challenge, like a dare. He swallowed with a sound that made the other warriors cheer and pound the table. Jake stood frozen, horror clawing through his chest. He saw the others reaching for the pile, grinning as they grabbed handfuls of deadly blooms. In 10 minutes, maybe less, they'd all be on the floor, their bodies shutting down one system at a time. And when that happened, the crew would need someone to blame. Jake didn't wait to see another bite taken. He spun and ran faster than before, his mind racing ahead to the only chance they had. Antidote. Something universal. Something to keep them breathing until I figure out the rest. The corridors blurred. The medical bay door slid open before him, and Jake plunged inside, hands already snatching vials and injectors from their racks. His pulse roared in his ears as he searched, mixing compounds with the speed of desperation. He had 15 minutes, maybe less, to stop the strongest creatures on this ship from dying on the floor. And the clock had already started. Gives, do you? Want me to continue immediately with Chapter 3, the frantic antidote attempt and the moment Vexer steps in? Jake's fingers shook as he yanked open another cabinet, scattering vials across the counter. The medical bay smelled of sterilizers and cold metal, a sharp tang in the recycled air that stung his throat. He swore under his breath, shoving aside instruments until he found what he needed: broad-spectrum antitoxins, adrenaline boosters, circulatory stimulants. None of it was designed for Corfac physiology, but it was all he had. He slammed components onto the counter, his movements frantic, but precise. Years of training took over. Measure, mix, stabilize. A transparent vial began to swirl with amber liquid as he added the final compound. He didn't have time to test it. He barely had time to think. 15 minutes, he told himself again. Then Grunan would be dead, and the others would follow. The door hissed open behind him. Jake spun, heart hammering, half expecting an angry mob. Instead, the doorway was filled with shadows and muscle. Vexer, the elder Corfac, stepped inside without a sound, his massive frame dwarfing the racks of equipment, his scales etched with centuries of scars that caught the white med bay light. Like worn armor, his golden eyes locked on Jake, and for a breath, Jake couldn't move. They ate it, Jake said, voice raw. I told them not to, and I know, Vexer rumbled, the sound deep enough to vibrate in Jake's chest. The mess hall called for med support, warriors convulsing. He paused, gaze dropping to the vial in Jake's hand. You think that will save them? Jake swallowed hard. I don't know, but if I don't try, there'll be corpses in 10 minutes. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft hum of the ship. Vexer moved closer, each step slow and deliberate. Others, he said finally, voice low, would let them die for their arrogance. I'm not others, Jake snapped, louder than he intended. He caught his breath, gripping the vial so tightly his knuckles whitened. Their crew. Doesn't matter what they said. I'm not letting anyone die if I can stop it. Something shifted in Vexer's eyes, then like a crack in stone, revealing molten light beneath. The corners of his jaw tightened, and for the first time, Jake thought he saw something that almost looked like respect. Go, Vexer said. He reached out, plucking a heavy med case from the shelf and holding it out like it weighed nothing. Take what you need. I will clear the hall. Jake nodded, slinging the case over his shoulder. The weight dragged on his frame like a stone anchor, but he didn't care. He ran, boots pounding the deck, every second ringing like a death knell. In his ears, when he burst back into the mess hall, chaos had bloomed like fire. Grunan lay on the floor, limbs jerking in violent spasms, green foam bubbling from his mouth. Two others clutched their throats, their scales slick with sweat that shouldn't exist on a cold-blooded species. The last warrior knelt beside them, eyes wide with something Jake had never seen in a Corfac: fear. Move! Jake shouted, slamming the case onto the table. The warriors scattered, their tails lashing as they backed away. He dropped to his knees beside Grunan, pressing 2 fingers against the thick-scaled throat. The pulse hammered like a war drum. Too fast, too weak. Jake jammed the injector against the joint in Grunan's armored arm and drove the plunger home. The hiss of compressed gas filled the air as the serum rushed into his bloodstream. "Come." "On," Jake muttered, moving to the next warrior. "Don't make me watch you die." Someone snarled behind him. "You poisoned them, human. This is your fault." "Shut up." Jake didn't even look up, voice like a whip crack. "You want to accuse me? Do it after they're breathing." Minutes bled away in a haze of needles and trembling hands. Jake worked like a machine, sweat stinging his eyes, throat dry as ash. He didn't know if the serum would hold. Didn't know if Corfac biology would reject it and tear their systems apart from the inside. All he knew was he had to try because no one else would dot. And then a sound. A ragged gasp like a drowning man breaking the surface. Jake's head snapped around to see Grunan's chest heave once, twice, foam trailing from his jaws. The tremors slowed. The pulse steadied under Jake's fingertips. "You're okay," Jake whispered, barely aware of his own voice. "You stubborn bastard. You're okay." When he looked up, Vexer stood in the doorway, golden eyes sweeping over the scene. The young warriors stared at Jake with something new in their faces, something that wasn't mockery. But it wasn't. Over. Not yet. Grunan's lids fluttered, and a broken whisper slipped between his fangs. "You helped me?" Jake met his gaze, voice steady now. "Yeah," he said softly. "Even after everything." Grunan blinked, confusion flickering like shadows. Then darkness took him again. But this time, his breathing stayed strong. Jake sagged against the table, muscles trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. For now, behind him, Vexer spoke for the first time since entering. His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "You could have let them die." Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, meeting that molten stare head on. "And what would that make me?" Vexer didn't answer. He didn't need to, but something in the way he looked at Jake told him this wasn't the end of their story. Asterisk the stellar. Dawn sailed through the black sea of stars, a silver blade gliding past drifting. Clouds of cosmic dust. 2 weeks had passed since Jake dragged Grunan and the others back from the edge of death, yet the memory still burned in his mind like a scar. He'd gone days without proper sleep, working late in the lab to triple-check every sample now locked. Behind warning seals. The captain had praised his quick action. The medical officer credited him for saving lives, but none of that changed the stares. Most of the younger warriors avoided him, now not out of scorn, but out of shame, and shame sat heavy on Corfac pride. They no longer laughed when he passed. In the corridors, they didn't call him Soskin or cargo or pet. Instead, they whispered in tones Jake couldn't quite read. Resentment, maybe? Or something like fear. The one who didn't whisper at all was Vexer. The old warrior had taken to appearing silently in the lab doorway during Jake's shifts, a shadow larger than life, his golden eyes fixed on the human like twin suns behind cloud. Sometimes he asked questions about toxins, about nerve agents, about plants that kill without teeth or claws. Other times, he said nothing at all, just watched, inscrutable as the void. Jake didn't know what that meant. He wasn't sure he wanted to. The call came during the evening meal, a tone slicing through the mess hall, chatter like a blade. "Attention all crew," the ship's intercom boomed in the fluid tones of Captain Czar. "Stand by for mission briefing. Report to the Central Assembly Hall immediately." Jake followed the current of towering bodies through wide corridors built for species twice his size. The assembly hall was a cavern of polished alloy and star-bright panels, humming with voices. Until the captain stepped forward, a tall, azure-skinned being whose eyes shimmered like deep oceans. Silence fell like snow. "We have received a distress signal," Captain Czar announced. A screen flared to life behind him, showing a planet swirled in white storms, its surface cracked with ice. Frost 7, Silani Research Station. There. Power systems are failing. The electrical storm prevents evacuation. Without thermal generators, the researchers will not survive the night. A low ripple ran through the crowd, uneasy murmurs, flicks of scaled tails. Jake's stomach tightened. He knew about the Zelani, crystalline beings who lived in precise temperature ranges. Without heat, they'd shatter. "The storm is intensifying," Czar continued. "Surface temperatures near -180. Hurricane winds. Magnetic interference. Disables all navigational systems. This mission will be dangerous." Dangerous, Jake thought grimly, watching the white cyclone twist across the screen. No, it wasn't dangerous. It was suicide. Commander Thrawn, all iron-gray skin and 4 muscular arms, rose from his place near the front. "Captain, I advise delay. The storm will end eventually." "The risk to crew." 6 days, Czar cut in. "That is the storm's minimum duration. The Zelani will be dead within 6 hours." The murmurs swelled louder this time. Jake felt heat bloom under his skin, anger and something else, something heavier, colder. He pictured the researchers huddled in a failing shelter, light dimming, hope bleeding away with every tick of the clock. He heard Grunan's rasped whisper, "You helped me?" And before he realized what he was doing, Jake stepped forward. "I'll go." The words cracked through the hall like a shot. For one frozen instant, every gaze snapped toward him, the lone human among giants, standing small and pale against. A tide of scale and sinew. Then laughter broke like thunder. "You?" Grunan's voice rose from the crowd, sharp with disbelief, and something Jake couldn't name. "The human wants to play hero now. You'd freeze solid before you." Cleared the landing bay, another warrior jeered. Commander Thrawn folded 2 sets of arms across his chest. "Jake Murphy," he said, voice smooth as cold iron. "Your courage is noted. Your survival odds are 0. Jake forced his chin high, though his throat burned. "Someone has to try. If we wait, they die. I trained in Earth's Arctic. No cold. I know how to navigate without instruments. Enough." Thrawn cut him off with a snap of his lower hand. "This is not bravery. This is foolishness. You would not last a fraction of silence." The voice dropped like a slab of stone, deep enough to still the air. Vexer was rising from the back of the hall, slow and inexorable, each step landing like the footfall of a beast too ancient to fear anything. The crowd parted as he came forward. Towering over them, all scarred, massive, golden-eyed, a living monument to wars the galaxy had long forgotten. He stopped beside Jake, his shadow spilling over the human like nightfall. His gaze swept the assembly, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "The human is right," Vexer said. 3 lives will end if we do nothing. That is not acceptable." The hall erupted, a storm of voices clashing against each other. Vexer let them roar for a heartbeat before driving a single word through the din. "Enough." Silence crashed back. He turned to the captain, bowing his head in the old warrior's salute. "I will go with him." The uproar this time was almost violent shouts of disbelief, protests of madness. Even the commander's 4 fists clenched in alarm. "Vexer, you are our strongest shield. Why risk yourself for this?" "Vexers." Eyes flicked toward Jake, then back to the sea of faces. His answer was simple, his tone carved from iron. "Because it is the right thing to do." And for reasons Jake couldn't yet name, those words hit harder than any roar of approval ever could. Asterisk, the shuttle bucked violently as it knifed through the upper atmosphere of Frost 7. its hull groaning under the weight of hurricane winds. Jake gripped his harness until his knuckles turned bloodless, teeth clenched as gravity hammered him into his seat. Outside the viewport, there was nothing but blinding white snow and ice whipping in endless, lethal spirals. Landing zone. In 30 seconds, Vexor's voice rumbled from the pilot's chair. His tone was calm, almost casual, as though they weren't diving into a frozen hell that could kill them both in minutes. Jake wondered if Korvac warriors were born without fear, or if they just buried it so deep that no one ever saw it. Didn't bother answering. His jaw was locked too tight for words. He checked his thermal suit instead, fingers brushing over every seal and gauge for the 10th time. Heat coils pulsed faint warmth against his skin, powered by a generator this size of a backpack strapped to his spine. If it failed, his blood would crystallize before he took 20 steps. The shuttle hit the ice like a falling mountain. Metal shrieked as skids gouged deep scars into the frozen crust, snow erupting in glittering waves before the thrusters burned it to vapor. Jake's body slammed forward against the harness, then jerked back as they skidded to a halt. Landing. Complete, Vexor announced, unfastening his restraints with unhurried precision. His golden eyes flicked toward Jake. Are you ready, human? Jake swallowed hard, forcing the quake out of his voice. As I'll ever be? The hatch groaned open, and the storm hit like a living thing. A wall of wind and ice howled into the cabin, ripping at their suits, clawing with knives of cold so vicious Jake felt it through layers of insulation. He staggered, boots sinking knee-deep into powder as he fought for breath that turned to frost inside his mask. Stay close. Vexor's voice thundered over the blizzard, more felt than heard. He loomed ahead like a walking fortress, snow whipping around him in a frenzy that couldn't slow his stride. Jake stumbled after him, visor fogging, every step an act of will against the storm trying to tear the world from under his feet. The nav beacon on Jake's wrist spun uselessly, its display a chaos of static, magnetic interference. He cursed, under his breath, pulling his old compass from a chest pouch. The needle trembled, then steadied. Not perfect, but better than blind. Tech's fried, he shouted through the comm. We'll have to go old school. Station's northeast 2 clicks, maybe more. Vexor glanced back, snow streaming from the ridges of his armor. Lead on, then. They trudged through an endless white void, the storm clawing at their backs, screaming in Jake's ears like a thing enraged. His legs burned. His lungs felt like glass. Every breath tasted of metal and fear. He kept his eyes on the compass, on the faint sense of direction pulsing through his brain like a mantra. Northeast. Keep moving. Don't stop. An hour in, they hit the chasm. It yawned before them like the mouth of a world-sized beast, a black gash in the ice stretching beyond sight in both directions. Wind screamed through its depths, hurling shards of snow that vanished into darkness without a sound. Jake crawled to the edge, stomach lurching as he peered down into that silent abyss. No bottom, no hope of jumping it. They'd have to go around. That would cost hours the Zelani didn't have. Options? Vexor asked, his voice a low growl against the storm. Jake's mind spun. Around them, the ice groaned like an old ship breaking apart. No time, no easy way. He yanked his pack open, dragging out a coil of climbing rope and a set of steel anchors. We make a bridge, he said, breath puffing in clouds that vanished instantly. For 20 minutes, he worked like a man possessed, hammering anchors into ice that splintered like glass, stringing rope across the gulf until it thrummed in. The wind like a drawn bow. His gloves were stiff with cold. His fingers burned, then went numb. Every muscle in his arms screamed for mercy. When it was done, he clipped the pulley to the rope and tested the line. It held, just barely. I'll go first, he said, Tightening his harness, he launched himself into the void. The wind tore at him, spinning him like a ragdoll as the rope creaked and shuddered under his weight. The chasm yawned below, endless and silent, waiting for his mistake. For one heartbeat, his gloves slipped, and in that frozen second, Jake saw himself falling forever. A massive hand clamped on his harness from behind, hauling him up like a child's toy. Vexor's grip was iron, unyielding as he dragged Jake back onto solid ground. "You almost died," the warrior said flatly. Jake's heart jackhammered against his ribs. "You think I don't know that? Then don't do it again." Vexor went across next, his bulk making the rope groan like a dying beast. Jake held his breath until the warrior's boots slammed onto the far side. They pressed on, hours blurring into a frozen eternity. Jake's thoughts narrowed to one truth: move or die. Then through the storm's shroud a shape loomed. The research station, half buried under drifts, its lights flickering like the last embers of a dying fire dot. Jake broke into a run, lungs screaming, boots sinking deep. He slammed against the emergency hatch and dug for the override kit with trembling hands. The lock hissed open. Inside, the Zelani lay curled near a dark heater, their crystal bodies dim and brittle with cold. One lifted its faceted head, voice a whisper of glass sliding on glass. "Help. We've got you," Jake said, dropping to his knees. His fingers flew across the generator controls, tearing out fried conduits, splicing wires until sparks danced like lightning bugs in the gloom. The backup thrummed weakly and roared to life, heat spilling into the frozen tomb. Color bloomed faintly in the Zelani's bodies, hope kindling like fire in crystal. But the ceiling groaned. Low, ominous note that cut through the relief like a blade. Snow and ice cascaded as metal screamed overhead, and before Jake could shout a warning, a slab of roof gave way. The impact shook the room. Debris slammed into the deck, and when the dust cleared, Jake's blood ran cold. Vexor lay pinned beneath. A twisted beam, his leg crushed under a mountain of steel and ice. "Go," he snarled, teeth bared in a grimace. "Take them and go. Leave me." Jake stared at him, heart thundering, snow melting on his visor like tears. And in that frozen breath, he knew two things. The storm would kill them all if they stayed, and there was no universe where he left Vexor behind. Asterisk. Jake dropped to his knees beside the twisted beam, his breath fogging in the freezing air. Vexor's leg was trapped beneath jagged steel, crushed against the floor at an angle that made Jake's stomach twist. The old warrior's armor was dented. Deep, scales cracked, and bleeding dark fluid that steamed in the sudden warmth of the restored heater. "Move them," Vexor growled, jerking his head toward the Zelani huddled near the wall. His voice was low, but carried the weight of command, even now. "Get them out before the roof takes the rest of this station down." "No," Jake snapped, eyes blazing behind his visor. "I'm not leaving you." "You can't lift this," Vexor said, grimacing as he tried to pull his leg free and failed. The beam didn't budge. "Even I can't. Go while you have time." "That's an order." Jake ignored him, mind racing. The debris was too heavy for brute force. Fine. He didn't need brute force. He needed leverage. Physics didn't care about. Size it cared about balance. He tore through the room, scavenging. A shattered strut became a makeshift pry bar. A cracked crate turned into a fulcrum. Cables still warm from the generator snapped tight as he wound them around the beam to distribute tension. "What are you doing?" Vexor's golden eyes locked on him, molten with fury and something else Jake couldn't name. "Saving my friend," Jake said without looking up. His voice shook, but not from fear. From resolve. Vexor stared at him for a long moment, something shifting behind those battle-scarred eyes. Then softly, almost to himself, "You're mad." Jake sat, his jaw. Mad gets things done. He jammed the pry bar under the beam. Boots braced against the ice-slick floor. Muscles screaming, breath coming in ragged bursts, he leaned into it with everything he had. The bar groaned. The beam didn't move. His arms shook violently, teeth gritted so hard his jaw ached. Come on. Come on, damn it. The Zelani watched in silence, faint color flickering in their crystal bodies, like the glow of dying embers. Outside, the storm howled against the walls. A beast hungry for blood. Jake screamed a raw, primal sound and shoved harder. The beam shifted. A fraction. An inch. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Now. He roared. Vexor bared his fangs and heaved, with everything left in him. With a sound like mountain splitting, his leg tore free. The beam crashed back down, shaking the floor. Jake collapsed beside him, chest heaving, sweat freezing against his spine inside the suit. His arms burned, his hands numb. But Vexor was alive. Alive and watching him with an expression Jake had never seen before, something fierce and bright, like the first flare of a star. "Why?" Vexor rasped, voice raw. "You risked them your life for me." Jake met his gaze, breath coming hard. "Because you're my brother. And brothers don't leave each other behind." The word hit like a thunderclap in the quiet that followed. Brother. For a heartbeat, Vexor didn't speak. Then, slowly, he nodded. And for the first time, Jake saw the apex predator smile, not the sharp-edged grin of dominance, but something rare and deep. They moved. Jake lashed a splint to Vexor's leg, while the old warrior leaned on him like a mountain tethered by will. Together, they herded the Zelani out into the storm, step by agonizing step, to compass their only guide through white oblivion. Hours bled into eternity, but they made it stumbling through the shuttle hatch, just as the last surge of the blizzard ripped across the horizon like the wrath of gods. When the stellar dawn's docking bay swallowed them whole, the roar of the storm faded to silence, and then came the voices. The crew packed the bay, a wall of towering bodies and glittering eyes. Shock rippled through them like a living thing as they saw who walked through the hatch. The human dragging 3 Zelani researchers behind him, and the greatest warrior of the Corfac limping, leaning on the smallest being aboard. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Grunin stepped forward, face taut with something between disbelief and fury. "This has to stop," he snarled, looking at the captain. "He's dangerous. He makes others take risks that could destroy us. We should silence." The word rolled like a drumbeat, deep and absolute. Vexor limped past Jake and into the center of the bay. Every gaze followed him as he turned to face the assembly, his golden eyes burning like twin suns. "You speak of danger?" he said, voice carrying through the steel cavern. "But you know nothing of strength." Grunin's jaw clenched. "He's weak. He crossed a world of ice," Vexor thundered, "when our finest would have stayed behind. He faced death for strangers who will never repay him. He freed me when even I had given up. And you dare call him weak?" Silence crashed down, heavier than the storm. Vexor reached to his belt, unclasping something small and battered by centuries. His battle insignia, the mark of a Corfac champion earned in blood and fire. He held it high, then dropped it at Jake's feet with a clang that rang like a bell of war. "By the code of my ancestors," Vexor said, his voice like the forge of worlds, "I name Jake Murphy Cathver Battle Brother, equal to any warrior. In this fleet, insult him again, and you insult me." A shudder rippled through the crowd. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, one by one, heads bowed not to Jake alone, but to the truth his actions carved in ice and iron. Jake stared at the insignia, heart pounding so hard it hurt. His throat closed. Somehow, his fingers lifted it, feeling the weight of centuries settled in his palm. His voice broke. He swallowed and tried again. I didn't do it for this. I know, Vexer said, a shadow of that rare smile curving his lips. That is why you deserve it. Hours later, the stellar dawn sailed on toward the next star, and Jake stood on the observation deck beside a figure who dwarfed him in every way but one. The void stretched endless beyond the glass, a sea of fire and silence. Do you really think I earned it? Jake asked quietly, the insignia gleaming on his chest. You saved my life, Vexer said. You saved theirs. And you taught me something. I had forgotten. He turned, golden eyes catching starlight like molten suns. What it means to be a warrior. Jake smiled, faint but fierce. Tomorrow, he said, we explore a new world. And this time, Vexer replied, resting a hand the size of a steel plate on Jake's shoulder, I want my brother beside me. Together, they stood in silence as the stars burned on a human and a legend, bound not by blood, but by something older and stronger than any war. *The end.